Welcome to the Jewish Art Salon Open Studios program. I'm Judith Joseph, and I curate this program and host it with my friend Dorit, Jordan Dotan. Our program advisor is Yona Verwer, who is also the director of the Jewish Art Salon. And we are helped in our efforts by Chana, Wiesenthal-Elias, and Cheselyn Amato. The Open Studios programs feature artists who are members of the Jewish Art Salon who responded to a call or were invited. Mark your calendars. The next Jewish Art Salon Studios program will be in 2 weeks, Tuesday, February 23rd at noon Eastern Time. Artist presenters will be Tina Marcus, Stephen Rudin, and Carey Kessler. Now for today, on the program, we are in the land of works on paper. All three of today's artists use text on paper for Emily Marbach as pattern and signifiers to be dismantled and redesigned to convey new meanings. Deborah Ugoretz uses paper as a scrim to be cut and layered, often with letters. Carrie Kessler expresses lead us on a journey with her inventive maps, which unfurl like Torah scrolls. Here is Dorit.
Hello, everybody. Judith, please, people are at the waiting room, I think. So if you can take care of that. The artists today will share with us their insights, visualizing Judaism through paper cuts and stained glass, raising existential questions through newspaper clippings, collages, and issues about environment, layers of geographical history, and the vastness of the universe. Emily Marbach is an American figurative artist based in London. Through painting landscapes and adding in narrative through small painted collage figures, Emily entered the world of collage. Combining collage and printmaking, she has created a distinct style. Marbach's most recent projects has been Jewish in theme. Back in September, she exhibited a large collection of collages for the Hidden Identity Project's Sky of Stars exhibition. The artwork explored the Bulgarian Jews' experience during the Holocaust and the little-known fact that none of the Jewish residents of Bulgaria were deported to the death camps. Her other project is the Collage Haggadah, which includes over 70 handmade collages exploring the themes of the Passover Seder and the Israelite exodus from Egypt. Emily, please share with us your screen and unmute yourself.
Hello there. So I'm saying hello from London, and thank you to the organizers, Dorit and Judith. I'm so impressed with the artist speakers in this series so far, and I'm grateful to be part of them. I'm new to the Jewish Art Salon, so let me introduce myself before telling you what I've been up to this COVID year. When my children were 1, 3, 5, and 6, I asked for a canvas, some oil paints, and a few hours to myself to paint. I'd always done something creative, whether it was writing or ceramics, but after that experience of the canvas 20 years ago, art became my front and center. I painted to classes in painting theory and life drawing, and in one class, I discovered acrylic inks. They are intense pigment that can be used as a wash or like a watercolor or like a very concentrated color, depending on how diluted it is. I made many landscapes and seascapes inspired by places I know in America where I grew up and visited in Britain where I live. But since my oil paintings had mostly been portraits of people and animals, I was missing figures. So I started populating my pictures with little people and animals, vehicles like London buses and black taxis, some houses too that I cut out of paper and painted. Many of the pictures dealt with the silences after difficult conversations when people are adjusting to a state of reconciliation or being alone. That was my first foray into collage. Eventually, that led to traditional collage, using handmade prints of my own and previously printed papers. Several years ago, I had been in Vienna and I bought a vintage magazine at a flea market. It was from the late, it was from the late 40s. And although I was immersed in the art of Sheila and Klimt during the visit, the Holocaust overshadowed my time there. I returned to London with the war on my mind, and I used a bit of my magazine to make the first of a few collages about saving the Jews from the Holocaust. I wasn't alive at the time, of course, and I probably, as a Jew, not been in a position to save anyone. But as an artist, I put my mind to imaginative ways, like sending a fleet of carp that could ride people off, or blonde wigs to hide beneath. The Jewish Art Salon had a call for art on the theme of the Holocaust, and they posted my pictures on Instagram. That was my first interaction with them, and shortly after, I became a member. Little did I know where it would lead me. 3 months later, just after the COVID lockdown had started, I'd received an email from Polina Angelova, a Bulgarian artist, designer, and curator who was looking for artists to participate in the second part of her A Hidden Identity Project exhibition. I spent the next several months learning about the little-known story of the Bulgarian Jews' survival of the Holocaust. The remit was to include stars or constellations in the pictures and dates, which added to the challenge. But because of COVID, I was really able to give myself to the task. I produced a series of about 20 collages. I restricted my palette to include just black, white, and yellow or yellowing paper that gave the works a cohesive look. I lino-cut yellow stars in the particular style of the Bulgarian star that didn't have the words Jude on them, but rather had 2 holes to sew on like a button. I made a series of patchwork backgrounds from Bulgarian newsprint and a Hebrew book I found on a street in Tel Aviv a few years ago. Each collage tells a different part of the story, whether it was the patriarch Kirill of the Bulgarian church pledging to lie down on the tracks if the Jews were to be loaded onto trains, or a letter King Boris wrote to the Jewish community in 1939, thanking them for birthday greetings. As a painter, I usually throw myself into a piece with little planning. This project required much more thought. How could I convey the stress of the Bulgarian Jews' world blowing up while still giving a sense of hope, as in retrospect, not a single Bulgarian living in Bulgaria was deported to a death camp? They had to leave the capital, Sofia, but they didn't have to go into hiding in the countryside where they were sent to live. Working-age men had to do back-breaking work building roads, but that was the government's excuse for delaying handing them over to the Nazis. It was a challenge. But I had already had the experience of taking a topic and running with it. For a few years leading up to COVID, I had been working on collages on the theme of the Exodus from Egypt and the rituals of Passover. COVID brought it all together and gave me the time and space to finish the collage Haggadah. What started as a random picture of people sitting at a Seder table, a man tired from hunting for leavened food around the house before Passover, turned into an exploration of major themes of the festival. So unlike the Bulgarian project, where I placed restrictions on myself, this project was totally different. From the outset, I didn't imagine that I would fill Haggadah with them. I thought of the artworks as standalone images. Each piece was conceived independently, with no style connection to the last, except that they were relevant on some level to the Haggadah. If I were to do it again, would I have collaged all my images on the same size paper, use only certain hues taken from papers from only certain dates? Possibly, but it would have been a very different book, much more constrained. This one is collages from all the different genres I do. It has painted collages, as in Arba, where the background was painted before the locusts were stuck on. There are print collages, like this one of Rabbi Akiva, where the bird was made from a laser cut of a drawing I made, which presents like a lino cut, but the plate is made of wood. Then there are ones where I've taken figures from vintage books, like in this Afikoman scene. And lastly, there is a collaborative collage that I sent to the scribe, Rachel Jackson, who later became my layout designer. I collaged these squares on a piece of Fabriano paper and then sent it to Rachel, who used her calligraphy talent to write the names of the plagues surrounding the minimalist picture. She raised the idea that each plague deserved its own page. There was something ironic about depicting plagues when the closest thing I'd ever experienced to a plague was descending on our world. It made me feel a little bit closer to what the ancient Egyptians were experiencing. For the first time, it made it real. So I agreed with her and made 10 more collages. My readers may be confused by the fourth plague, which is depicted here and is labeled wild beasts. The fourth plague arov, which means to mix, is translated in two different ways. Originally, it was popularly believed to be wild animals. Rabbah, Rabbi Yehuda, Sadia Gaon, and even Rashi, all scholars in their own rights, believed that lions, leopards, some thought wolves or tigers, even bears, made their way into Egyptian houses to terrorize the people. But Rabbi Nehemiah thought it was a mix of insects. The Greek translation of the Bible, the Septuagint, also thought it was insects. There's a similar word to arov that sounds like the Greek word for dog flies, and they have a particularly vicious bite. Umberto Cassuto, a great Bible commentator of the 20th century, said that plagues are grouped in pairs. 1 and 2, blood and frogs, relate to the Nile River. 5 and 6, cattle disease and boils are diseases. 7 and 8, hail and locusts come from the sky. And lastly, 9 and 10, darkness and death of the firstborn relate to darkness. So it would make sense that the fourth plague would have something to do with the third. So in insects, as a category for plagues 3 and 4, fit with lice. And that is why I chose to depict them as insects, but translated arov as wild beasts to honor that other interpretation. But also because I came across a beautiful and free book of insects a few summers ago. One of the places I find my material is in Connecticut. I spend time each summer with my American family at my mom's house there. The town doesn't pick up garbage, so we have to go to the dump. I say we have to, but actually I'm always the first to volunteer because they have something called the swap shop there, which is like the eBay for donations. One person drops, another person picks up. Every summer I collect encyclopedia, unwanted library books, and mail them back to London, where I use them during the following year. You really can't find manuals for firearm use and books about heroes of the Confederacy in London the way you can there. By the way, the horror I felt the first time I cut up a book has vanished. They are just paper in a different form to me now. Moses is never mentioned in the Haggadah. The rabbis were always trying to clarify or minimize the importance of Moses' position to distinguish his role in our religion from that of Jesus or Muhammad in theirs. But I felt sorry for him because after God, he is the hero of this story. So I have depicted Moses 4 times. You can see him here standing before the burning bush, having removed his sandals. And on the right, his portrait is a leader with his vision only with the enslaved people in mind. The classic Michelangelo Moses with horns, God giving him the 10 commandments. I've depicted them in blue, as there is a midrash that the tablets were carved from sapphire, and I love that idea. And finally, there's a collage referring to his death before getting into the promised land because of the old story that he hit the rock to give people water in the desert instead of speaking to it. I'm not worried that these depictions will begin the cult of Moses over allegiance to God, if one were so inclined. It's just a bit of a love letter to him because he was a flawed character and had so many challenges to overcome. Some he did and some he didn't. And I wanted him to be present in these pages along with Pharaoh and the Red Sea, etc. And vis-a-vis the horns, I kept them there as a reminder that although we Jews are mainstream members of society in many places in the world, there are still people who harbor crazy theories about us, including most recently that we started the California forest fires with Jewish space lasers funded by the Rothschilds. On the subject of money, I've decided to give the profits from the Haggadah sales to charity. In case you think that the Haggadah doesn't contain any depictions of women, I thought I'd post my gefilte fish canopic jars and a bit of Miriam with her tambourine at the Red Sea. As a lifelong feminist, I've always felt excluded by the four sons. This Haggadah is making up for that with a collage of the four daughters. I've made a collage on practically every day of the pandemic since March. I call it my greatest luxury. I haven't slept a night away from home since then. I haven't been inside a restaurant or a museum, but I've had my impulse to make art. Because I feel I started late in life with little formal education, until this year, I've always felt like I never had enough time for my art, even when that wasn't even the case. This year, I can no longer say that. I'm sated. And although I'm very sad for all the hundreds of thousands we've lost in the pandemic so far, art has kept me connected to people, grounded, and most importantly, delightfully busy.
Thank you, Emily. That was fantastic. I forgot to mention that you should put your questions in the chat, but we do have a few for Emily already. Julia Reimer-Brucker, you had a question.
Yeah. Wonderful work, Emily. I really love it. I've been doing a lot of work with collage and old books myself, so I really appreciate it. Really, I'm just wondering about finding like your website and just sources online. I actually have a friend who's from Bulgaria, and I think she'd be interested in seeing the work that you did about the Bulgarian Jews. So thank you.
Well, thank you. So I'm piecing together a website at the moment. I'm concentrating on the Collage Haggadah website, which is collagehaggadah.com. If you go to my Instagram at Collage Notting Hill, you scroll down till you start seeing yellow, then I have a lot of the collages there, or Hidden Identity Project website. That will take you there.
So I'm looking at the chat and I see a lot of praise. Any other questions for Emily now? We'll also have a little time at the end.
Yeah, I have a question. First, thank you so much, Emily. It was beautiful collages, artwork. I wonder about the flea market in Vienna, because I know this Sunday market very well, as all these Jewish looted, you know, the ritual Jewish objects are all over there, and it's shocking to be there and see how they sell it. And so I wonder about the magazine that you used, that you bought there. Was it something special for the Jewish community of Vienna?
It actually wasn't. You know, it was a sort of, I guess, the Austrian equivalent to Life magazine. But oddly, it had quite a lot of, quite a few stories about Jewish people, including a kind of page of photographs of Jewish community in America that included African-American Jews in Talit and pictures of post-war Jewish communities there. And so, but I think that was just accidental. I mean, that was why I bought it, but I don't think that was their usual theme.
I have another quick question, if it's possible, Judith.
Go ahead.
It's about the hidden identities, that the first slide you showed, were those buttons in the shape of the yellow star. What kind of material did you use for that?
Well, those buttons, those were made out of wood. and I did not make them. They were Paulina's. She gave them to me, and I painted them and actually turned them into a little necklace because I thought maybe this could become the reclamation of the yellow star as a fashion object. But they were laser cut wood.
It's so interesting. And Emily, I just want to thank you for sharing your journey to art, because I think it's illuminating. Each of us comes to it at a different time in life and in a different way. And not everybody shares that. So thank you for sharing that.
Can I ask a question of Emily?
Yeah, quick. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, first of all, Emily, wow, thanks. First of all, curious, why the Bulgarians? Is that your background? And secondly, you ought to post where someone might be able to obtain your collage Holocaust, not the Holocaust, the Haggadah.
Okay, so firstly, no, I'm mostly of Polish, but a bit of Russian, which I think we can attribute that to extraction. No, it was just I was just approached by a Bulgarian woman, and then it became a very interesting subject to explore because I had never heard about what had happened. And it is an extraordinary, we all know about the Danes, but many people haven't heard about what happened to the Bulgarians. So, and then if you go to www.collagehaggadah.com, then you can find the books are being printed just now, and they'll be available any day now.
Excellent. Well, congratulations. Wonderful. From the few things that you're showing us, they're absolutely fascinating. And it's wonderful to see someone really digging deep into the material. You're obviously very comfortable with the material, and it's really great and inspiring.
Well, thank you very much.
Indeed. And for our next fabulous, awe-inspiring artist, I'd like to introduce Deborah Ugoretz. She was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She is recognized by the New Jersey State Council on the Arts as a master cut paper artist. In 2017 to 19, she received a grant from the NJSCA Folk-life Program to mentor an apprentice. For 8 years, she was a co-coordinator of an Artist Beit Midrash, artists who study Jewish texts and create visual interpretations. Ugoretz currently lives in Brooklyn, New York, and has a studio in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Ugoretz has designed stained glass windows and synagogue art. She has developed and taught courses about the art of Jewish paper cutting and manuscript illumination at the museum at Eldridge Street and Yeshiva University Museum, New York, and for many institutions in the tri-state area. Her expressive work, paintings, constructions, and mobiles deal with the exploration of feminism, the natural world, and political activism. Her paper constructions seek to communicate through pattern, movement, and shadow. So Deborah, please unmute yourself and share your screen.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Judith and Dorit and Yona and everybody else connected with the with the Jewish Art Salon. I'm going to be focusing on my cut paper work and some constructions that I've done over the years and also during COVID. I use work in cut paper as a way to explore my fascination with negative and positive space. The act of cutting away is a process that reveals the graphic form of things and illuminates the concept of balance through structure. The ancient Kabbalists believed that it was possible to find meaning in the empty spaces around and within the letters of the Bible. I was struck by the idea that the void could hold infinite meaning. In Kabbalistic beliefs, negative space, called tzimtzum, is seen as a way that God allows us to determine our own destinies, but within a context that requires us to live within a framework of values designed to elevate us to a certain level of holiness. Negative space is not empty or meaningless. It exists to support what it is possible for us to see. So this is Do Not Lose Hope. This was a piece I did in 2016 when I heard that certain people were running for president. It seemed like a very fraught time. And so I created this paper cut, which is kind of an homage to Eastern European style Jewish paper cutting, in that it contains lions, which are the symbol of the people of Israel, and peacocks, as in the Yiddish culture, creativity, and then some very typical Polish Jewish symbols, the chickens. And I found this thing in Mishlim, in Proverbs, which just seemed to strike the right note. And the quote is, "Know that wisdom is for your soul, and if you find it, then there will be a future, and your hope will not be cut off." So it was really kind of a response to some of the candidates and their lack of wisdom, and the whole idea that if you have wisdom, wisdom brings hope. So this was very quickly a poster I did when everybody knows, and now I'm totally losing the guy's name, the gentleman who was killed by police on his neck. It was just a poster that I threw together very quickly. The whole idea that my brain was exploding with this horrible event. I'm sorry, like his name is totally out of.
It's George Floyd, right?
Thank you. Yeah. So just to show you that things have not changed much, this is a piece I did in response to George Floyd's, not George Floyd, George Floyd was the first one, to Eric Gardner's death, and the whole idea of justice, justice you shall pursue. This is an installation which has a candle, a huge candle, like a yahrzeit candle, surrounded by the phrase, justice, justice you shall pursue. And then this ripped up sense of how justice has been destroyed by our, there is no justice, or there isn't much justice for certain people in this country. This is a piece that I did recently. It's called The Amulet, and on the left is my piece, and on the right is what I based it on. The idea, the piece on the right is an old paper cut from the Carpathian Mountains from the 19th century, and it's an amulet. It's called a Shir Hamalos, which is a prayer that you put in a pregnant woman's room to keep Lilith from stealing the baby and seducing the pregnant woman's husband. And it's, as most of us know, Lilith was the first female mate of Adam. She was equal in many ways, but for some reason within our folk tradition was made into this demon for exerting her independence from Adam, or her equality. So if you look on the right, you have this very strange and really fascinating collection of phrases and psalms that reflect what a Shir Hamalos is. If you look at the top, it says Shaddai Kar'eh Satan, God will banish Satan. If you look at the, what you did was you put this particular piece on the four walls in the room, and so you had Adam, the fathers, and then the mothers, the four mothers, protecting the child and the pregnant and the woman who just gave birth. And then in the middle is this very interesting Rachel Penima. So Rachel, of course, is one of the imahot in the Bible, but Penima means in front of or is here. So, and then in these little squares over here, do you see my pointer? Do you see my cursor? So in this section, you have this strange incantation, which says in Hebrew, the witch shall not, and the witch shall not live the witch will not live the witch not. And then you have the names of the three angels who were tasked with taking Lilith away from the child's room. So what I did was chose to make it a real, more of a praise and a feminist statement about the contributions of women to focusing primarily on the environment. So a lot of in these, is there a way for me to make the image bigger?
If it's in a PowerPoint, I'm not sure.
All right, so instead of these birds over here, I have these ostriches, which are to say, forget about this shtuyot about amulets and protecting babies from demons. What we really have to be concerned about is the environment and how pollution, all these bottles acquiring in the sea. Get your heads out of the sand and deal with what's really important. And so instead of the angels down here, I have the names of three people who I feel have affected, three women who have really addressed the issue of environmental change and feminist thought. One is Rachel Carson, Simone de Beauvoir, and Thurberg. And then in these little circles all the way around, I have the names of scientists, artists.
I have to stop you. I think you need to move to the next slide. I think you're talking about your next slide, and we're seeing the.
Oh, you don't see this paper cut here?
Oh,
No,
With the lions and the.
She's
Yeah.
still on the same one. Dorit.
I'm still on the same one, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, so in these circles are all the names of women, artists, writers, scientists, and I honor them by putting in their names and their contributions. And then in the center here, you have this flower. Here you have Rachel. I chose to put the Hebrew name of Ruth Bader Ginsburg because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive and was there to protect us from all this. This is, then a few years ago, I was so stymied by my inability to sort of choose something, some cause to work in, because there's so many horrible things going on in the world. I was just frozen. So I did this piece. It's pretty large. It's about 50 feet. I'm sorry, 50 inches. And in the top, in these little squares, I wrote down all the horrible things that are going on in the world: injustice, overpopulation, rape, unemployment, you name it. And then I was thinking, my God, I've gotta have a much more positive message. So below, starting right after more, I put in the names of organizations that are addressing these ills in our society. And I sort of gave this sort of twisted satirical title, my favorite crossword puzzle. why didn't I do more? What more can I do? Why not do more? So it's kind of a double message of, beating myself up and also saying, I'm just one little person. So my fantasy with this is to produce it and plaster it all over the city somewhere in the middle of the night. The next piece I'd like to talk about is called The Evil Box. I was asked to participate in a show at a Hebrew Union College, a show whose theme was evil intent. And I was thinking, I don't really have an answer. My work doesn't really deal with evil per se, but then I got this idea of creating this box out of, I think I have another detail. Creating this beautiful box, I made these flowers out of glassine and tracing paper, and I glued them to this box, cut out viewing holes, and inside I put in a mirror. And what happens is the whole idea behind this is Jewish thought states that every person is born with both a good inclination and an evil inclination. We spend our lives fighting between what we are told are selfish and violent impulses and the desire to do good, to be supportive and kind. These inner battles bubble to the surface at varying degrees. How do we react to the revelation that underneath the cover of goodness and beauty, there might be something evil lurking? What is our capacity to do harm? And when the depths of that darkness is reflected back to us, what are we to do? So what happens is you're attracted to this beautiful box, which is about 13 inches by 13 inches. You're drawn in to look inside, and what you see are your eyes reflected back to you. And it's chilling. So I'm pretty proud of that. So the idea that we can be beautiful on the outside, but what is our capacity to do evil? And what do we do with it once we learn? I wish I could show you the inside, but there's no way to get a good picture of what it looks like inside. This is an installation piece I did called Conversations, which deals with Hebrew and Arabic letter forms. The whole idea that using the beauty and the sound, because there's a soundscape that goes with it, for people to understand that Hebrew and Arabic have incredible beauty, and it's sort of a way for me to introduce the idea that perhaps by gaining an appreciation for the sounds and the shapes and the beauty of the letters of Hebrew and Arabic, there can be a way to create a connection between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I have to say that I made this a while ago when there was a lot more hope for peace, but it's still pretty relevant. So there are elements that are on the ground and that hang from the ceiling. The discs are cut out, and so light shines through them. So you get these new patterns by the light coming through, and they move in the air. And this piece goes with it. It's called Four Flags, and the whole idea of what if we took, how can we create a society where the rights of Palestinians and Israelis are in balance and are equal. So that's what this is also paper cut and acrylic paint. Four Flags. How much time do we have? How are we doing with time?
I think, let's see. I think if you could wrap it up in a couple minutes, that would be great.
Okay.
Finish.
So Love and War is a box I did I do a lot of work in response to poetry. This was a poem that we studied in our Artist Beit Midrash about a poem called God Takes Pity on Kindergarten Children, written by Yehuda Amichai. And the idea that God has given up on adults, but he sheds his life on young lovers and on children. But it also envelops it in the poem. There's this horrible scene of wounded soldiers crawling in the sand. But it also mentions that some reference to the coins that mother gives sort of to redeem you, to redeem the world. So I chose to make it into a tzedakah box because in Judaism, the tzedakah, giving tzedakah is a way to and sometimes avert the bad things that can happen. This is also called Love and War because you have this, these are all bought in 99-cent stores. The idea of this beautiful set of lovers on a picnic bench, not knowing the possible pitfalls of love and marriage. So finally, I guess if we don't have enough time, this is called The Mountain of the Law, which is this huge paper mache thing I did with the hundreds of laws about the Shabbat. There's not the Midrash, oh my God. Anyways, there's this saying that says the laws of the Shabbat is like a mountain hanging by a hair over the people. So this whole idea of Shabbat is only mentioned twice in the Torah, but there's this huge amount of laws that govern how we're supposed to observe the Sabbath. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea. And okay. So finally is this piece I did, which is a book, which is the 6 days of creation, which starts on this side with Tohu Vavohu and goes through my interpretation of the 6 days. And the 6th day, when God created man and woman, instead of man and woman, I have this pollution of the statement that we have not taken care of the earth, that we have really desecrated it. And the other side is the same themes, the same designs, but in paper cut. So I think my time is up.
Well, Deborah, before you get out of your screen, would you go back to the ruined cities? Because I love that one. I want everyone to see it. Thank you.
Ruined cities these things are only 1.5 inches high. And these ruined cities are actually underneath that mountain right here.
Okay, I didn't realize it fit in like that. They're just beautiful.
Thank you. This is
very inspiring. You did so much in such a small amount of space there.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for your presentation. This was really fascinating. I really like the 4 flags. It's very strong and very important to do those pieces of arts that are political. So I really appreciate that. This is the time for questions. I think I saw Emily asking Richard. Let's start with Emily. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, that was a great presentation. Thank you. I wanted to know the discs that you cut out and hung up, with the Hebrew letters and the Arabic. Yeah. So, what were the discs made out of?
They're made out of paper. It's a very thick Fabriano watercolor paper, which it's white paper, which I painted. And then for the white discs, I put on a medium that would stiffen it a bit.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
Richard, did you want to ask something too?
Sure, sure. Deborah, thank you so much. Your work is obviously so impressive and far-reaching. But two things. One, the Lilith. Well, you push back against Lilith a bit and kind of put something positive for sure. But the issue of Lilith is something that I think should be open to all of us to explore. And one question I'm wondering if you in your research have noticed. I've never seen any commentary talk about how Lilith is created. We know how Eve is created. We know how Adam is created, but it's kind of interesting. She doesn't get a creation, or maybe she does. That's one thing. And the second thing, while I very much know the whole notion of the struggle between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, right? Do we really think this is a fruitful way to think about the human personality and life in binaries? I suddenly realized that, I mean, I've heard these terms, you know, for the last 40 years, but are they helpful for us figuring out what's going on in our hearts and heads?
Well, that one you have to ask the rabbis, I guess. But
we're all fit to answer these questions.
I'll take the first one.
Okay.
First. What was the first? Oh, yeah. So I was researching Lilith. I went to the Encyclopedia Judaica, and I was going into the Bible on the internet to find out the source of why Jews had, traditional Jews, whatever, had this crazy attitude towards Lilith. And the only place that she's mentioned anywhere in the Tanakh is through Isaiah, who talks about, she lumps her in with all these animals that are violent and regarded as unkosher and vile. I was going to read it, but I didn't, but I did. It says, so it's verse 34:14, quote, "It shall be a home for jackals and ostriches, wildcats shall meet hyenas, goat demons shall greet each other, there too Lilith shall repose." So the woman embodies the emotional and spiritual aspect of darkness, terror, sensuality, and unbridled freedom. So that's the only place.
This is rabbinic fear of female sexuality and female power, of course. But I was just wondering, aside from Isaiah, I'm talking about in terms of the Midrashim. We don't get, she can't just appear, right? The world doesn't exist until God makes it.
Yeah.
So at the very least, perhaps you could say that Lilith, no, she was made by God, put there in the garden by God.
Right, but for some reason because she was not subservient, they had to kick her out. And well, there's discussion about her being kicked out, or she fled. She left because she was rejecting that. So they're two. As far as the other issue about evil, and I also agree that there aren't two binary ways of being in the world. But I just thought that a lot of times people, we tend to look at things very superficially. We tend to look at beauty as good, and sometimes it's just not good.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Unfortunately, there are a lot of questions and there is a lot of conversations. You have to look at the chat, but we have to continue.
Sure.
So thank you very much. Carrie Kessler is a Seattle-based artist who explores her experience of time, place, and spirituality through the use of map imagery. She has shown her work widely, including exhibits at the Katona Art Museum, New York, the Witherspoon Art Museum, North Carolina, the Tacoma Art Museum in Washington, and most recently at the Bellevue Art Museum, Washington. Kessler's work can be viewed in the flat files of Piero G. Gallery in New York City and is included in two books, The Map as Art by Kitty Harmon, Princeton Architectural Press, 2009, and From Here and There, from the Hand-Drawn Map Association, Princeton Architectural Press, 2010. She's currently a member of Shift Gallery in Seattle. Please, Carey, share your screen.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank the Jewish Art Salon, particularly Judith, Joseph, and Dorit, Dotan, for giving me the opportunity to speak today about my work. This is such a challenging time to stay connected, and I'm grateful to be part of this community. I decided to start my talk with an image from Thursday, March 5th, 2020, at the opening of my art exhibit, Here is the Place, at Shift Gallery in Seattle, Washington. On that day, the reality of the new coronavirus was just setting in, and I wasn't sure if anyone would show up. It's not advancing. Oh, there we go. But artists and art lovers and friends showed up, and we elbow bumped and toe tapped. And I was able to have some really lovely conversations about my work. But the gallery was filled with only half of the usual First Thursday crowd. And by that Saturday, the gallery was closed to the public indefinitely. As I said earlier, the title of that show was Here is the Place. The title referred to the fact that in Hebrew, the word for the place, hamakom, can mean a specific known physical place, or it is also known as one of the names of God in the Torah. So what does it mean to be here? That is one of the questions I ask myself when I'm painting. And for me, painting is an act of meditation. When I'm making the repeated dots and lines of my paintings, I stop thinking about the everyday, mundane events and obligations in my life, and I start thinking about more spiritual and expansive ideas about the environment, layers of geological history, the mystery and grandeur of the universe, and the fleetingness of each moment. This piece is approximately 3 feet by 7 feet. I mostly use watercolor, stencils, stamps, and freehand writing to create my map-like paintings. The locations in most of my map paintings don't exist in the real world. They're my own inventions. I decide on the labels. Dots can be birds or stars or sand. Dashes can be roads, fault lines, or the passage of the day. Pools of color can be vanishing clouds or lakes or simply a passing shadow. We live in a world that is mapped all the way from outer space right down to our front doors. However, my maps embrace ambiguity. Unlike cartographic maps that depict borders and boundaries and delineate specific areas like land or water, my places can be both an everywhere and a nowhere, or as I wrote in this painting, a place beyond the bounds of thought. By dissolving the distinction between time, space, water, sky, and memory, my maps create a bridge between spiritual places and physical locations. I collect words and phrases from poetry books, novels, science texts, and Jewish texts, and I add to and recombine those phrases to create a network of thoughts about the world and universe that we live in. I'm not a scientist or a religious scholar, but as an artist, I'm interested in the intersection of the current environmental crisis of climate change and the ancient stories of Genesis, Jewish mysticism, and even the high holiday liturgy. Although I don't usually use Hebrew letters in my work, I think a lot about Hebrew words such as makom, which means place, and Shemitah, which is the Sabbath year for the land when the land is left to rest. and Lador Vador, meaning from generation to generation. These are words used in the Jewish tradition that emphasize the fact that we are caretakers for the earth. The earth is precious and precarious, and we need to honor and sustain it for future generations. Many of my maps explore feelings of uncertainty and ecological grief for the environmental changes happening around us. These feelings have been exacerbated by the current coronavirus epidemic. This piece is titled Uncertainty and the Unknowable Present, the Unpredictable Now. This rings even truer today than when I made it pre-pandemic. In this piece titled What is Ending and What is Beginning, I also wrote the view of what was and what has disappeared. We know there are species becoming endangered and extinct, coastal cities getting wetter, forest fires getting stronger, and viruses spreading faster. And this can be overwhelming, but perhaps if we zoom out beyond borders and boundaries and see only the mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas, we can focus on our connected humanity and how we can adapt and pivot our behaviors. By zooming out, we can focus on the incredible importance of air and water, and the way that both air and water and viruses defy borders. When there's pollution or a pandemic in one part of the world, the whole world is affected. The title of this piece, Accelerating, refers to what is sometimes called the Great Acceleration, a concept about humanity's impact on Earth's geology and ecosystems that has been accelerating over time. I also included the words fragments and layers from deep time. Geologic time or deep time humbles me. The impossibly huge span of geologic time that extends back far beyond the human scale is almost as impossible to imagine as the depths of space. And for me, deep time also includes the future, and it includes the eternal things that were here before humans and will remain once we're gone. So far, I've only talked about the work that was in my show at Shift Gallery last year. Right after Shift Gallery closed due to the pandemic, my studio building closed as well. So I packed up a small amount of my art supplies and set up a temporary table in my bedroom because the rest of my house was taken over by my husband and 2 sons who were also suddenly working and schooling from home. During those first few months when I was home, I created a series of small paintings, approximately 6 inches by 6 inches and 5 inches by 7 inches, such as this one titled Time According to Water. And this one, The Weight of the Day Again. And this one, The Vestiges of Tired Places. Needless to say, in this time of the pandemic, the idea of place has taken on a whole new set of meanings. The physical places we can go are restricted, and we find ourselves in increasingly smaller spaces. At the same time, for many of us, our internal sense of place is also disrupted as we grapple with a growing sense of anxiety and isolation. I was very fortunate that at some point over the summer, my studio building reopened, and I happily moved my work back into my studio and started working bigger again. I worked on this painting, The Urgency of This Moment, which is 8 feet long and 3 feet high for most of the summer and fall. This is a detail. I started painting this, I'll just go back for a minute. I started painting this work right after the Black Lives Matter protest started, and I was feeling the urgency of racial justice and environmental justice and how that relates directly with climate change and the pandemic. These are some details from that. This one reads, "The place where silent space converges with the chaos of the world." And this detail says, "Seas of invisible things and so much damage." This refers to the fact that although in many ways, both the pandemic and climate change are scarcely visible to many of us, in other ways, both the pandemic and climate change are upending the whole world. When I was working on the large painting, I was also working on a series of pieces that range in size from 12 inches by 16 inches and 18 inches by 24 inches. I tend to work on more than one painting at a time, going back and forth between them, adding dots and color until they finally feel finished. This piece muses about the vastness of the cosmos, unfathomable eternity, and the gravity of each day. I also started this piece, seemingly measureless mystery, during the summer. Then I put it away thinking it was finished, but when I pulled it out a few weeks ago to photograph, I added more color, and these cloud-like shapes emerged, which often show up in my work, but seem to be showing up more this year. I created this painting in the fall for a Simchas Torah project at my synagogue, where congregants were invited to create art that visually expressed a parsha of the Torah. I took on Bereshit and created this piece titled "In the Beginning." I was excited to try out my Hebrew letter stamps for this piece. One of the things I miss most right now are art openings. This is a photograph taken in February 2019 of my artwork, "A Portable Homeland," unscrolled on a table at an opening reception at the Weatherspoon Art Museum in North Carolina. The title of this piece, "A Portable Homeland," plays on the idea of the Torah as a portable homeland, but instead is about my imagination or my internal landscape as a portable homeland that I can take with me wherever I go. And here is a photograph of another crowded art opening, also from 2019. This was a reception for a show I had in Seattle titled "Between Place and Thought." The show was made up of a series of 5-foot-long map paintings that explore what I call the spaces between place and thought, between space and time, and between the external world around us and eternal worlds within. I want to end with one of the pieces from that show titled "Sacred Space, Neither Here Nor There." Although it currently feels like we're all wandering around in the dark without a map, I hope that perhaps my maps, which embrace the fact that we don't truly know where we are, can act as a prayer for guidance for both our planet and for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. That was very brilliant work. I love it. And you have a lot of compliment on the chat. You can look, and Judith.
We ran over a little, but I definitely do not want to give you short shrift, Carrie. And I just want to say too that I was so moved by your work. And as an artist who also does a lot of work on paper and a lot of calligraphy, I think there's a sense in when you work on paper, there is a connection with a scroll, with the Torah scroll, especially if you do lettering. And there's a topography of the paper that sort of becomes the map of your life as you work your way across it with this very intricate work. And I think you get a sense of time that it takes for the artist to work on it, and just the time and the mapping of your own life and the roadmap for life. And all of that is in your work. And I just find it very moving. And like Dorit says, like the other artists, you have many accolades in the chat. One of the questions that came up, and a question that I also had, I don't remember who asked it, sorry, but the question was about your lettering in English. Did you use stencils, or is some of that hand done? So I'm curious about that.
I use different stamps, letter stamps. So I do one letter at a time with the stamps. I also have stencils, so I'll paint through the stencils, and I also write freehand. This piece that's up here is all stamps, 2 different kinds of stamps, 3 different sets of stamps.
It's such an, it creates such an interesting contrast, the precision of the stamped or stenciled letters between that and the more freehand, hand-drawn imagery. It's beautiful. It's just, I don't know, it just brings us to another place. I think it brings us to a place of mass-produced maps too. So it, if everything was hand lettered, wouldn't quite have the same effect, I think. So I'm just looking in the chat. Much praise. I'm looking for questions.
I just figured out how to see the chat. So.
Oh, okay.
You can stop sharing your screen so you can see everybody.
Oh, okay. That would help. Okay.
See everyone, right. Hetty made an interesting comment. Hetty Abramowitz. I like the contrast of the block letters that seem in control and constrained against the emotive stains of the loose, transparent watercolor work. So Hetty said what I said, only better. So that's great. So we are over time, but that's okay. Does anybody else have a question for Carey that you could maybe write in the chat or just pop in with it verbally?
Hey, I have a quick question. I'm sorry, maybe it was answered already, but what kind of paper are you working on?
There's a variety of paper. I sometimes use Hanji paper, that it's like a rice paper. I often use just regular watercolor paper with a variety of weights. That's mostly it.
Well, just beautiful work, fascinating, thought-provoking, and just lovely.
Yeah, it's very poetic. Your images and your renderings are just like poetry, visual poetry.
Thank you.
I have
Rena, were you trying to pop in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to pop in for a second. It's about your poetry, the words actually. It's 2 parts. The first is, well, they're together actually. Do you write it down before you paint it? Does it come out as you're painting? And do you use it afterwards? Do you write it ever as poetry separate from the painting?
I want to be a poet, but it never comes together like a poem completely. And it's so caught up with imagery for me that it is what it is. It's not poetry, but it is in a way. I keep running lists of words and phrases that I hear in books and I have them on pieces of paper while I'm painting. And then I use them almost like another paint or stencil or something. Like an area needs something compositionally, but I'm also feeling having a certain thought, and I'll look at the words and decide what I want to put there. So
sometimes you're making the word, sometimes you're putting the words together in a string, and sometimes you're lifting them from someplace else as well.
Yeah, I keep running lists kind of words, and then I put them together in different ways depending on what I'm painting.
Thank you for showing this really amazing technique. I love it. Thank you.
Susie Dessel, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, really wonderful work. I was wondering, Carey, when you're creating the work, are you seeing people looking at it flat as we saw that very long 8-foot piece, or more of the pieces are on the wall, or to you is a particular perspective not what's in your head when you're creating?
I make most of my work on the table as opposed to up on the wall, but the only piece I've ever shown on a table is the portable homeland one, and I purposely kept the left-hand roll of the paper still on it, so it's weighted down and it seems like it could keep unscrolling, Whereas other work, I've cut it and hung it on the wall with bow clips or some, if the bigger work. So it could be shown either way, but the only one I've ever shown horizontally was the one portable homeland.
Okay, thank
So
you.
you always show your work without glass or plexi, or do you ever use covering over it?
I frame the smaller pieces, or even those sort of like 5-foot long ones. Those are framed.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Judith,
Once
maybe
they get a
one more
certain
question.
size, they're just really hard to frame. I suppose if if something, I'm not opposed to framing it. Although again, the portable homeland one, I wouldn't frame because the scroll part of it is part of it. I would have to figure out some way to include that.
Well, and I think there's an interactive aspect as we move around the table, or we would if we could, which is different. You interact with the piece differently. So I think, Dorit, I think we got all the questions.
So thank you, everybody. It was wonderful, very nice combination of the three of you that were somehow connecting to each other in many ways. So I really enjoyed. I hope everybody did as well. Thank you for participating in the Jewish Arts and Open Studios programming. Next program is February 23, featuring artists Tina Marcus, Stephen Woodin, and Karey Kessler. Thank you, everybody, and have a pleasant day and evening if you are on this side of the world.